Hello and welcome to episode 17 of this Inspired by 2020 Visionary Chat Series. I'm delighted to be joined today by none other than Kingsley Aikins. Kingsley, how are you?
Super, thank you.
It's great to meet you. And I've known you for 2 or 3 years now, and you're a consummate professional. You've had an amazing career. You're the CEO of the Networking Institute. You've been the former president and CEO of the Worldwide Ireland Funds. You're a highly acclaimed networking expert, trade promotion expert, philanthropy, diaspora management. You've done a lot of things, and you've also had a rugby career, and you've traveled the world, and you've lived in Australia as I have. So it's a privilege to be talking to you. And really, to kick off, maybe if you can just give the audience 5 minutes, really background about you, your life, and how you got to this being a global expert in networking.
Well, probably out of desperation is a quick answer. But firstly, thanks for having me on. And secondly, that was, I have to say that introduction was way over the top. It was totally exaggerated. But I have to admit, Simon, it was exactly the same as the one I emailed you last week. So thank you. Thank you for doing that. So how have I found myself in this position? I don't really mean desperation, but, the mother of invention and all those sorts of things. I left Ireland. When I finished college, I went off and I played rugby in France for a season. I got kind of injured over there and I gave up rugby, but it always became an interesting passport for me throughout my career. And it circles back a little bit later. But I found that when I went to places, and I was keen always to go to different places. So, for example, I was posted out to Australia, and I literally arrived one morning in Australia, and I knew nobody in that country. And I think that's a wonderful blank canvas with which to start. And I realized fairly quickly that I wasn't going to be able to achieve whatever I wanted to achieve on my own. I needed to build a network. So I just bought into this notion of you need to network your way to success. The other thing, I was lucky enough to have gotten to know people who are quite good at this. And you know that old adage, we are the average of the people we hang around with?
Yes.
And if you hang around with people who are good at networking, I find that sort of this stuff, it sort of rubs off a little bit. Yeah. Sort of a bit of osmosis happens, and you realize that, the characteristics of great networkers I discovered over time were fairly standard amongst all people. They work hard at it. They don't brag about it. They don't keep score. They understand there's two types of information in the world. There's formal information, and you can Google and read reports, but you can't compete on what everybody has access to. And then there's informal information, which comes from your network. So I realized all of that. Then as particularly in the last number of years, I realized that, great networkers are high tech. They totally understand the power and use of technology, but they're also something else. They're high touch, and they get that balance right. Yeah. And frankly, I think we're veering away from the touch side, and we're veering very much towards technology, which is a little ironic, seeing as I was speaking to you over Zoom.
Yeah.
Does all that make sense?
It does. It does. And in terms of the technology side of things, I interviewed Ted Rubin, who's the CMO of Photify, a company in the States, and he was saying that in a funny respect, we're social animals, which is what this is your business. It's about, the social context of human beings. But in a funny way, being online like this and facing each other almost focuses your attention even more, right, than if you're in a room, because there are no distractions. It's not ideal, but there is a focus. And the other thing is that when you're online, you've done some of the research about each other. So in some respects, there's already some sort of trust, even though you're behind a screen. Okay. What do you think about that? Because, the whole area of networking, whether we like it or not, we are all networking online right now. So there is going to be a new norm here. How is networking technology changing networking, which is a huge question?
Well, I'm fascinated by the question, obviously, because I've always been a fan of a woman called Sherry Turkle. And Sherry Turkle is an American MIT professor, wrote a book, it was a bestseller on the New York Times list, and it's called Alone Together. And what she was saying is technology is fantastic. We can connect with anybody, anywhere in the world, but we're all alone in front of a screen. Well, I agree with that, and I've always felt that was one of the dangers of technology. But ironically, as you just explained, this enforced isolation has brought about that technology is actually a medium of intimacy. which was the exact opposite of the tendency of the trend that was happening before the lockdown and the COVID-19. So I agree with you.
Absolutely. It's ironic. I mean, just thinking, doing this series, I've reached out to 23 global leaders like yourself, Australia, US, UK, here in Ireland, and 20 unequivocally said yes, without any questions, rarely really asking me why I'm doing it, and I spoke with Sally Helgeson, who's the world's premier expert on female empowerment, a couple of weeks ago. And I said to her, Sally, I hope you don't mind me saying, but if this lockdown wasn't happening, would you have found the time to speak to me? And she said, probably not, because she'd be traveling around doing. And so that's the amazing thing, is that I don't think people realize that we can all access more influential people through this medium than we ever contemplated. And also people of influence are prepared to give back, So there's a lot of change happening as a result of this. And it's not all one way. I think we're all helping each other,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's not all bad, but obviously we're the lucky ones. We haven't been afflicted by the awfulness of it. And I think there's probably some big challenges coming down the pike at us as a result of this. But I do take your general point. I think all of us have had a little bit of enforced hibernation. We quite like what's happening to the environment. We like the fact that we can spend more time with family, etc. Yeah. But I'm getting a little weary of it all now, I must say, and I'm getting ready to getting back. And so I'm in the position of getting ready for re-emergence. Now, it may take some time, but I don't want this to last.
No, I agree. It's funny, I normally go walking along Dunleary Pier with a group of mature men, put it that way, every Sunday morning. And we this Sunday was the first time in 3 months, and it was just a feeling of freedom just to see each other again in the flesh. It was a wonderful thing. So, this whole series about the Inspired By series, really it's about, the intent of this is to spread a message of inspiration and optimism, but it needs to be a pragmatic optimism. And you were quite rightly saying there that, without naming specific businesses or specific companies, there are real challenges ahead, probably in middle management, and there are real cost efficiency challenges and brand challenges. What can you share about that in terms of how that might affect the ability of organizations to continue to connect and maximize networking? The negative changes that you see, the challenges.
Yeah, look, at a kind of mega macro level, historically, a lot of these awful occasions which have happened in the past have been followed by periods of great innovation, great creativity, and great inventiveness. Also, I think I'm lucky. I think you're fairly lucky. I mean, the last 40, 50 years, certainly in Europe, has been very peaceful. I mean, the European Union has been one of the most genius inventions in the history of mankind, because it's brought about peace. Germany and France are not fighting. England and Sweden aren't fighting. So I think that's really wonderful. And somebody put it to me quite colorfully just recently. They said, imagine you were born in the year 1900. Yeah. When you were 14, there was a world war that killed 22 million. When you were 18, there was a flu, a pandemic that killed 50 million. When you were 29, the whole world economy collapsed. When you were 39, we entered into another brutal world war, etc., etc. But we've had a fairly event-free. Now, we've been fortunate in the right place, right time. And so it's naive of us to think that that's going to continue forever. And so one of the points I would be making is that, yes, as we come out of this awful crisis, there will be more down the pike. So I think we have to prepare ourselves and be ready for that.
Absolutely. I talk about this whole thing. We spoke before. I call it denial optimism. As you said, for the best part of 70 years in Western Europe and North America, we've been looking at other less fortunate parts of the world, and we've sort of, we've got enwrapped with technology and everything's gone our way. And now I call this period a circuit breaker period. For the first time in history, I think, maybe I'm wrong, but all 7 billion people on this planet will never forget 2020. This is like a circuit breaker year. And I suppose, having said just that, the question comes to me, how does that feed into mankind or humankind in relation to how we're going to network going forward? How are we going to interact going forward? Has this negative circuit breaker, do you think it's going to bring us closer together, generally speaking? What do you think? What's your sense, Kingsley?
Oh, look, I think there's going to be some short-term trends, and there's going to be some more medium and long-term trends. I think probably we will all go back flying around the world. I think we'll go back to an awful lot of the stuff that we've sort of decided to take a bit of a holiday from. But in the short term, I think we are in for disruption and turbulence and bizarrely opportunity. You know? And even in these awful times, there are certain sectors and segments which are absolutely booming. Yeah. So I think you're going to see these shifts, and you alluded to at the beginning of your question there. There will be, I suspect, pretty dramatic impact on middle management, particularly around the world. I think companies are going to cut their costs. They have to cut their costs. They're going to look at a 50-year-old guy or gal who's maybe costing 120,000 a year and say, there's a 23-year-old can do that job, maybe even do it better. So I think that one of the reasons why networking is going to become really important is that these people are going to have to look at potentially job change for sure, but maybe even career change, maybe even whole lifestyle change. And they're all coming, and they're coming at us maybe faster and more unnoticed than people. I don't think the media are giving much attention to this. Yeah. But I think companies are planning for this. And so, that's going to be a bit of a shock to the system. People who have had a great career for 20 odd years never really had to look outside of what they're doing, never actually really had to build a network of diversity. And that's one of the key things that I teach about network is building diversity. Never had to do it. They're going to have to do it now.
Absolutely. And, you and I have been through this process. I came later to this. But, the last 3.5 years, I built my own database of connections and, in different jurisdictions. And it's hard work, Kingsley. There's, you've been doing this for a long time and, developing connections and thriving through your own reputation. There's no shortcut, is there? It takes hard work. And, you then mentioned companies and, I talk about the three-legged stool for organizations. They're going to have to face, on the one hand, as you said, having to reduce costs and efficiency, while number two, they have to still communicate and put marketing out, but more sensitively. And then number three, they still have to look to the future. So the three of them are kind of mutually exclusive, but the best management and the best leaders need to manage all those things. And I think you mentioned before, there's some examples of some businesses who are thinking about their reputation, because it's going to be, I think those businesses who manage their reputation sensitively now, and also leaders and networkers, are more likely to thrive. What do you think about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's some research just been done during the pandemic by Edelman, who are the world's largest communications company. Yeah. And what they looked at about 80 countries, and there was an overwhelming sense from the consumer out there that they're watching what companies are doing and that they will penalize, in a consumption sense, companies who are not doing the right thing during the corona crisis. I thought it was quite interesting. I just noticed yesterday in an article in the newspaper here about IKEA, the Swedish store that's everywhere, who made a policy decision to give back to the governments of all the countries in which they're active the money that was given by these governments to their employees, because IKEA are absolutely booming. Everybody's into DIY and painting and tidying up their shop. Yeah. But I think the other thing that you were just touching on at the beginning is that notion of so I'm a fan of Tom Peters. I mentioned him. Yeah. He was one of the great management gurus in the late 90s. And he had an article in Fast Forward magazine, and it was called Me Inc. And his concept is that you're chairman, managing director, CEO, and marketing director of a company called Me Inc. In other words, it's you need to take responsibility. You cannot rely anymore on organizations. You can't rely on your boss or your boss's boss. Who do they care about more, their career or your career? So what he's saying is you need to invest in yourself. You need to find out what can you do that brings value to others. So this whole idea of Me Inc., and he talks about your personal brand. And I'm a believer in that. And although I don't particularly like the phrase personal brand, I understand that everybody has a personal brand, whether they like it or not. In fact, not having a personal brand is having a personal brand.
Absolutely.
And your personal brand is not what you say it is. It's what other people say it is. Absolutely. It's your reputation is what somebody says about you when you're not in the room. Absolutely. And so now you've got to be thinking about creating that, getting known, not famous, but getting known. Yeah. So we live in a world where it's not what you know or who you know, but who knows you. Absolutely. And it's very interesting how companies now want to hire and wire. They want to hire people and wire into their network. So now your network becomes part of your net asset base. It's something that you possess. When you move, it moves with you.
Yeah.
So suddenly you own this thing, but you got to build it. It takes, so for some people, it's too daunting because it feels like picking up grains of sand one at a time. But eventually it becomes bucketfuls. And eventually then it really is the thing that's got to move and push your trajectory. Yeah. And then the other thing that people don't realize is that particularly people don't realize as they progress through their career, the technical skills they needed to get their job in the first instance become less important and relationships become more important. Absolutely. And I'm a fan of Carla Harris, who's the 30 years with Morgan Stanley, New York, the highest black executive in the banking industry, colorful, wonderful lady, fantastic singer, really great. And she hammers this point. She says, in your career, you have two types of currency. One is performance currency, which is how well you do your job. And that's great. But the other is relationship currency. And what she says is in your career, you need three types of people. You need an advisor who gives you good advice about what you're doing. You need a mentor who will give you the good, the bad, and the ugly. But you need something else. You need a sponsor. And a sponsor is somebody who will talk about you when you're not in the room. And when you think about it, most decisions about your career will be made by people in a room, and you're not in that room.
Absolutely. and it also goes with this whole area of online communication or networking, whatever you want to call it, but we're communicating as human beings. And it's interesting, you know, I started this series and I spoke to the likes of Marshall Goldsmith and John Mattone and Sally Helgeson, and I thought that was it, right? And then out of the blue, I got a connection from another global guru from Canada about a week ago saying, I'm very interested in your series, right? And so that's why I've extended it, because to the point that I'm making, Kingsley, is that very senior people, whether we know it or not, are watching us or not. They're either watching us or they're not, you know, so that depends on the work we do. And it just reminded me that, you know, you did a piece for me when I was doing the deal closing stuff, and you made a really profound comment. And I think we can apply it to networking. You said that every deal you close is a down payment on the next deal. And I think every interaction we have, whether anything comes out of it or not, that's almost a secondary thing, is a down payment on our future engagement. I don't think there's any wasted engagement because we learn from wasted engagement. Do you agree as well? The more interaction we have, as long as we're careful with our time and we create boundaries, it's all of value to some extent. Would you agree with that, or would you challenge that?
I'm a big fan. I call it just do stuff. I used to admire Herb Kelleher, who is the founder of Southwest Airlines. A wonderfully colorful guy. I managed to meet him once. He had these big boots on. They were up on the desk, and he had a glass of whiskey and a big cigar. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. Extraordinary guy who actually was the sort of instigator and the idea behind Ryanair. Michael O'Leary worked over there in Southwest Airlines, and it was just fascinating. But his line when he was asked about what's the success of Southwest Airlines, he said, "We just do stuff." So I'm a big fan of just doing stuff, because in that, by doing stuff, here's what happens: serendipity, luck, chance. So I'm a fan of, I call it funnels of serendipity or managed serendipity. I'm a fan that you can make luck happen for you, but it doesn't happen lying in bed. It doesn't happen sitting at your desk. I mean, you either think luck is like a bolt of lightning or winning the lottery. It's total chance. Or, like I think, it's like a gentle wind at your back. It's always there. And if you do things and change your routines and say yes more often and get out and about, you know, guess what happens?
Absolutely.
Serendipity, luck, and chance enter your life.
No, absolutely. So that's what I was saying. And so just to pivot a little bit in the last 10 minutes. So nations. Okay, so I know you do a lot of work around nation branding, and you have done work around that, and reputations and soft power. And you know that I represent Brand Finance over here in Ireland, and Brand Finance launched the Soft Power Index at Davos in January, which seems like a different century ago now, back in January, pre-COVID. And Ireland is the fourth most intangible economy in the world. It's been the last 3 years the fastest growing nation brand in Western Europe, and it is extremely propitious in terms of soft power. And you're involved. So what would you, this whole area of soft nation power, how would you articulate it, and any themes you're seeing, particularly in relation to Ireland?
So soft power actually was first coined by Professor Joseph Nye in Harvard University. And he wrote a book called Soft Power. It's a great read. And what he said is countries can achieve what they want through attraction rather than coercion. So hard power is military might and economic might, etc. And soft power is this more sort of attractiveness that you can create. It's your culture. It's things like your music. It's like all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So he sort of said hard power was the Second World War. Soft power was the Marshall Plan that followed it, you know. So soft power is really important, and particularly important for small nations, because Ireland's not planning to invade anybody in the near future. And the last time we won a battle was the Battle of Clontarf in 1014. So we don't have a great track record in hard power, but we have awesome soft power. Now, that's for the reason that, you know, we have a gigantic diaspora. So 10 million people left Ireland in history. So they're all over the world. They're in positions of affluence and influence all over the world. Yeah. So we do have that soft power, that reputation, that sort of stuff that you're talking about, soft brands. But countries are realizing that this is an absolute gem of an asset. And if you can get this, the spin-off. So my real focus has been all through my life with this notion of countries, cities, regions having diasporas. Yeah. I also take a broader definition. Universities have diasporas, and the American university alumni system is phenomenal, they do. I also think cities have diasporas. A couple of years ago, I wrote a report for Copenhagen, 300,000 people outside Denmark, and they want to connect with them. So what were once lost actors are now national assets. Yeah. So countries realize that. And also, small countries in particular, we need our friends around the world. We can no longer rely on these major multilateral agreements being in force. So we need to build our connections, because the information age is over. We now live in the network age. Yeah. And in the network age, the measurement of power is connectedness. Yeah. And so that's what you need, because for the first time ever, it's more important what you do than where you are. In the old days, your geography dictated your identity. You lived like you in Perth, that's who you were loyal to that, etc. But now you can live in Perth and be engaged in Greece or Poland or Portugal or Ireland. Yep. So Ireland's got this. Ireland's understood this much more than many other countries. The other countries that get it are India, China, Israel, and Ireland. They're the top four in this space. Yes. And it's kind of fascinating now how, so I did a job for Tunisia last week. I'm doing a podcast for Azerbaijan next week. I'm running 3 Zoom in Lesotho. It's all the same thing. They're trying to figure out, how can we do what Ireland and Israel and India and China have done for quite a long time. Yeah. So countries are now kind of waking up to this as potential that they have in their diaspora to help their. So I've developed a concept called diaspora capital, which is resources available to a country, city, region, and has 3 flows: flows of people, flows of money, and flows of knowledge. And lots of people are trying to get into this. But, you know, don't get me going on this, Simon, because they used to tell me in America, never give a Mick a mic, because they just don't stop. But if you get me going on this, you'll have to shoot. Yeah.
No, I get that very much because of the work I do with brand finance, and I've seen the numbers for Ireland, right? And they're also, you know, this, you know, when you think about it, I mean, Ireland is a windswept rock off the west coast of Europe, with no real limited natural resources. All its resources has been human capital through history, and yet it's the 4th most intangible economy in the world. I mean, why isn't the press talking more about this? I mean, but that means all of those major multinationals and think tanks and tech companies and farmers, they all have intellectual property based out of Ireland, right? And these aren't just tax reasons. These are human reasons. These are motivation reasons. There's the first thing. And then the other thing I don't hear, and I don't hear the Irish press say enough good things in the other direction. So there's a number that I think it's about 30,000, brand finance talk about it, about 30,000 senior executives in London are Irish. I mean, directly Irish, not 3rd, 4th generation, running big companies. And, you know, I know brand finance have discussed toying with the idea of doing some sort of, wouldn't it be interesting if you could do some sort of soft power survey on what it is about the Irish decision-making, that soft power, and the Israelis have it in their own different way. But what is it? Can you put a KPI? Can you put a measurement around why it is that so many good Irish presidents and business leaders are Irish, it's more than just the crack. It's more than just having fun. It's more than just the charm. There is a soft, persuasive influence thing, but I don't think anybody's actually put a KPI around it. But what do you think? If somebody could measure this magic, this Irish soft, persuasive power, it would be dynamite. What do you think about that?
Well, I'm sure you'd need, great psychoanalysts to really dig into this thing. Maybe it's because, I always say our diaspora is so powerful because we were a victim diaspora. The most powerful diasporas in the world are victim diasporas.
Absolutely.
The Jews, the Armenians, the Irish because of our famine. So there's a deep folkloric memory scarred into our tissues. I think that's there. I think we have we've historically and continue to have a really good educational system. And we, in fact, owe a lot to the churches for what they did in the old days. There's nobody doing that now. But that was a huge part. Our primary school system is very good. Our universities are very good. So we churn out great people, probably too many great people for this small little windy island off the edge of Europe, as you said. Yeah. And I think then something else, which is another dynamic, which I'd love to put a metric around, but it's this sense of belonging. Yeah. And I think the sense of belonging is one of the great drivers in the world. Mostly good, sometimes bad. But this sense of belonging, there's a lot of talk, particularly in America, around the world, about diversity and inclusion. But now they're beginning to talk about what they call DIBS, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. How do you engender a sense of belonging, a sense of loyalty to an organization, to a place, to a country? I mean, the whole thing about diaspora, I always feel, it's not actually loving a country, it's loving a place. So you can have somebody in London who's extremely successful. They're very passionate about Donegal, and they rather hope Cork falls over. You know what I mean? So but I think it is fascinating and of course the glue for those people in London and everywhere is networking and networks. And I think we have a natural proclivity towards that because we're social animals. We're particularly social animals in Ireland.
Yeah, there's a real power. And when I'm not going to talk about politics, but when you see what's happening in the UK right now and the US and Russia and Brazil and all of these big economies are run by very macho, invariably right-wing men, right? Who a lot of the time are not connected to the empathy, the feminine empathy that you need for good networking. Whereas in Ireland, right? I mean, just today, the two major parties, traditional parties who 100 years ago were at war with each other, have just announced, subject to the party approval, a historic agreement with the Greens. Now, there's huge power in that, as an example setting. Whether or not it's going to work, whether or not it'll actually be good for the economy is another thing. But at a time when the rest of the world is polarizing and fighting, Ireland today is announcing coalescence. There's I think that goes back to that sense of belonging and pride and that togetherness in Ireland. I really do. Would you agree with that?
No, I would totally agree with that, and we watch with interest, as you say, as they put together, which was, who'd have thought of this just a few years ago? I mean, Dad would be turning over in his grave, all that kind of stuff. But I think that shows a maturity. I mean, we've evolved and developed, and I hate all this. We're the number one, we're the best. We're not. We've good things and we've bad things. But I think that, on balance, the government have done a lot of good things. They've handled the COVID crisis very well. The people have responded in a very respectful and very responsible way. I think there is a strong social cohesion within the country. I think that helps. But sure, that we still have our problems, and we don't bleat about it and say we're the number one or we'll make ourselves great again.
No, absolutely. So just wrapping up, Kingsley, if you were going to, and it's been a fascinating conversation, and I could talk to you about the nation brand thing and the whole diaspora thing and networking thing, because my grandmother was Irish, a Polish grandmother, English on the other side, and I've lived in Australia and I've lived in 5 countries, and Ireland is my home. My wife's Irish, my daughters are Irish. I'm an Irish citizen as well. So for me, the world is my place, and people can't replace whether I have an English or an Australian. Sometimes when I go to the UK, I sound Irish. I don't care. The world is the place. So just to wrap up, if you were going to whisper 2 or 3 words of wisdom to somebody who was going to be the future Kingsley Aikins, who was going to be taking networking and bringing nations together and creating that global community of the future, what 2 or 3 words of wisdom would you tell them?
Well, you you mentioned there, the world is your oyster. As I say over here, the world is your lobster. But I do think, I would say to like my youngsters, I was just talking to them today, I mean, get ready, get ready. We have an old expression in Ireland: when business is down, that's when you paint the shop. Okay. So that's when you get ready, because things will surge again. You know, it's going to be possibly longer than we think. It might be next year, but places will surge and soar again. In fact, one of the reasons why companies are so nervous about letting people go was, up until this crisis, the biggest problem in Ireland was the attraction and retention of talent, was to find people to do these jobs. That will come back, you know, and so I am an eternal optimist in these areas. And although I'm privileged by not having suffered from this crisis, I do think things will come back.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think we need to be calm. We need to be calm. We need to be compassionate, but we also need to be courageous as well. And if strong, decisive decisions need to be made, they need to be made. But it's been really great chatting with you, Kingsley, and I look forward to seeing you on stage again. I know you've been doing Pendulum Summit and various things, and those days will come back again, and that's where you should be. You should be delivering that passionate. You have a real passionate for the space. So it's been great talking to you. Thanks very much.
Good. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.